Thank you. Our next speaker, Brenda Appleton, is Chair of Transgender Victoria, Co-Chair of the Victorian LGBTI Taskforce, and a member of the Victorian Elder Abuse Roundtable. Brenda is passionate about using her lived experience in an effort to improve the health and well-being of trans and gender diverse people in Victoria. She was inducted into the Victorian Honour Roll of Women in 2017, received the Victorian Senior of the Year Award in 2018, and was awarded an Order of the Australian Medal in 2019 in the Australian Day Honours. She is also an alumnus from RMIT.
Thanks, Catherine. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. I welcome this opportunity to speak today. Unfortunately, I only have 10 minutes. I think for all the areas that I'm involved with, I could fill several hours. So I've had to be fairly selective, and I've focused very much on Victoria, and particularly LGBTI, and then a little bit more detail on trans and gender diverse. We're lucky to be living in Victoria. We are where it's happening from an LGBTI perspective at the moment. We've been fortunate to have Labor governments here for most of the last 20 years, and as a result, we've had some very progressive policies, and we're fortunate that we've made more progress than in many other parts of the country. And we continue to push even harder to I guess, try and make it easier for others to follow, but also to improve rights and access to justice for our LGBTI communities here. I co-chair the LGBTI Taskforce for Victoria with Martin Foley, who is the Minister for Equality. And we've been fortunate to have a very supportive government to work for. I've been fortunate that my period on the taskforce has coincided with a very supportive government. The taskforce is whole of government and comprises 6 community members, Martin Foley, 6 community members, our fabulous Commissioner for Gender and Sexuality, Ro Allen, Deputy Secretaries from the main departments that we work with, Premier and Cabinet, Justice, Health and Human Services and Education. And we have 2 working groups under the task force, one on human services and one on justice. I attend both of those working groups. And we also have individual advisory groups sitting under those around intersex, trans and gender diverse and in education. Ours is the first whole of government task force in Australia to operate in this way, and it gives us access to all departments. We're going through a review at the moment, and we're intending to invite other government departments to come and present to the task force on a rotational basis so that we extend out past where we are at the moment. One of the key things that we've been able to do is work with Labor when they were in opposition under the previous coalition to develop the framework that we've got. And it is fundamental for us achieving the sorts of improvements we've had across LGBTI programs. The setting up of an equality branch within the Department of Premier Cabinet, providing adequate funding, having a commissioner who is just so passionate about these things has been really important. One of the things I found on the Coalition's Ministerial Advisory Committee was often the inertia from government departments. And we're finding that by having deputy secretaries sit at our meetings at the task force, having members of parliament that co-chair our main meetings ensures that we hold those departments accountable for what they're saying they're going to do and actually delivering. So it's been fantastic. We work to influence the government agenda. We work to influence the manifesto that the government put up ahead of the election last year. And there were some key programs included in that. One of them, a LGBTI strategy for Victoria. and we've worked with federal Labor as well, and the expectation is that we'll get an LGBTI strategy for a whole of Australia in the event that Labor is successful at a federal level. We don't particularly want an LGBTI strategy, but we're finding many government departments today still do not put an LGBTI lens on everything that they're doing. And therefore, I would love in Nirvana not to have all the individual rights, I guess, being accounted for in individual strategies. But it's a stepping stone for our voice, our lens to be reflected in everything. Another key agenda item for the government is around birth, deaths and marriages reform. I'll go into that a little bit more. We're also going to be preparing some particular work around conversion practice, conversion therapy, and trying to find the right level of legislation to introduce which will criminalise inappropriate activities which are happening in Melbourne, in Victoria, across Australia today. We're also looking, and it will again depend on the federal election, trying to redress religious exemptions in schools, and it's absolutely appalling. We also have religious exemptions in aged care facilities, not to the users of the service, but from staff that work there, and I think it's appalling that that situation still exists. Another key focus for us coming up is more addressing the issues faced by our intersex community. And I guess we don't like to have a hierarchy within LGBTI of some of the issues that we face, but the intersex community has been left behind. We're making some progress at the moment, and there is more work to be done, and it relies on the support of allies and not just the beating of the drum for the intersex community. The Justice Working Group, so what I wanted to talk about in terms of talking about justice is how do we get justice in Victoria for LGBTI? And we do that through the Justice Working Group. And I'd encourage people, there's going to be an opportunity to apply to get onto the task force, the Health and Human Services Working Group, or the Justice Working Group later this year. Our term is up in November, and it's then open for applications. And I'd encourage people that are interested in contributing to the development of that program to get involved. The Justice Working Group is meeting approximately 4 to 6 times. I think we're actually going to have 6 meetings this year. And we provide input, particularly to the Department of Justice, on a wide range of activities. What can be done better, what's not being addressed, what needs to be added to the agenda. And it takes time to work it through. We've got a particularly active group, and we do that, I think, very effectively. The LGBTI strategy will be a whole of government strategy. Ideally, we would have a community which would develop a strategy and then the government respond to that. But we don't really operate as an LGBTI community. We did a little bit through the marriage equality situation, that appalling process that we went through leading up to the change. So this is going to be a government-led initiative driven by the Department of Premier and Cabinet, but with a lot of consultation of the community and the position of the task force to sign off on each of the milestones that we're just in the process of putting together. So I'm delighted that that program's underway, and I think it's going to be fundamental to ensuring that justice for LGBTI people, access to appropriate services, including health and health services, will be addressed. It's going to take us 2 to 3 years to do it. The intention is to have it done before the end of this term of government, and to then start making sure that other departments are following what's in that. All government departments will be involved in terms of the consultation, and there's going to be widespread community consultation. Birth certificate reform is particularly dear to my heart. I was involved heavily 3 years ago when the government bill was defeated in the upper house of the Victorian Parliament, and human rights were denied to transgender, diverse and intersex people. We have a different upper house this time round, and the same bill is intended to be reintroduced, I'm hoping, in this current half year. And we've stuck with the same bill, We want to avoid the spiteful and hateful comments that we got from the opposition last time. I've been out and proud for more than 20 years. I was distressed and put off my stride as a result of the fear tactics that were raised in our Parliament by elected officials. It was absolutely appalling, and we are hopeful that by sticking with the same bill we can avoid some of the rhetoric that we've already had. Time will tell. Certainly I've been engaging with the crossbench, and there's a lot of support in the crossbench, and we're hopeful that the coalition will see the writing on the wall and pull their heads in. At the moment, the key aspects that we're looking for, when we put the bill up in 2016, or the government did, you had to be single if you wanted to change the sex marker on your birth certificate. So someone like myself, next Monday I will have been married 47 years. I would have had to have divorced to be able to change the sex marker on my birth certificate. You would have had to have had surgery. So if you're a trans man, someone assigned female at birth, living as a male, they were supposed to have a hysterectomy if they wanted to change the sex marker on their birth certificate. If you're under 18, you can't change your sex marker on your birth certificate. And for many young people, it means they have difficulty transitioning at school, they have difficulty getting employment, and difficulty being themselves. So it's fundamental that we remove that. We also don't allow other than male and female. We know for the trans and gender diverse community, nearly half of our community today identifies as non-binary, neither male nor female. And at the moment, they can't have that on their birth certificate. So there's some important reforms that we need to be working through, and one of the things the opposition said 3 years ago was it was ahead of its time. Well, now we know that 4 of the 8 territories and states in Australia have already got legislation in place, so we're now a laggard rather than a leader. We lead in most things, but not in this area, so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to see that fixed. The final area I want to talk about is something that's also dear to my heart, and that is making it easier for trans and gender diverse people in our prison system. You can imagine that justice is difficult for those who are trans and gender diverse. We have a binary prison system, male and female. Many trans and gender diverse are most unsafe in our prison system. When we started, Transgender Victoria started work about 6 years ago with Corrections Victoria. They said there aren't any trans people in prisons in Victoria, which was wrong at the time. We now know that there are trans and gender diverse people in most of our prisons. Fantastic developments have been that the Commissioner's requirements for the treatment of trans, gender diverse, intersex people in our prisons was introduced in January 2017, and it is a great document. It is leading the way in Australia. We've now also got Justice Health have developed the healthcare for trans and gender diverse in prison. Not quite as good, we're doing some more work on that at the moment. TGV has done 20 training sessions in our prisons in the last year, and we've been focusing on providing a framework for LGBTI, and then focusing on how do they implement the Commissioner's requirements for the appropriate treatment of trans and gender diverse people. It is complex. I met with 4 trans women in a men's prison 2 years ago, and I asked them, would you prefer to be in a women's prison? And none of them said yes. 2 of them said probably. One said, well, I've got a boyfriend here, so I don't want to move away. And the other one wasn't interested. We have trans men and trans women in our women's prisons. We've had young people so youth justice has got a long way to go, and we're working with them at the moment. So we've now got a draft LGBTI strategy for the treatment of young people in youth justice, and there are some particular issues there. But it's important that we look after everyone in our community, and our trans and gender diverse people are struggling in our prisons. Fortunately, with the training we've done, it's a lot better now than it was, and we're delighted that we've actually got a good working relationship with the prison system. Justice for all is coming, but it's slow and it takes a long time, and we need to have a strategy to get there, and I would encourage those that are interested to consider joining the Justice Working Group or even the task force. Thank you.